Maybe you're familiar with this scenario. Your child was managing, not perfectly, not easily, but managing to get through and meet the challenge of each day. And then one week, it's like a switch flipped. The things that they used to be able to do, they just can't. Shower? Nope. Homework? Definitely not. Even coming to the table to eat might be a challenge, and nothing that you're trying to do to help them is working. You've heard of autistic burnout, and you're wondering, is that what's going on here, or is this just defiance? And here's what makes it even harder to tell. There's a stage of burnout that looks like your child should be able to do those things they're used to doing. That stage happens right before things fall apart completely. And if you're in that stage right now, what you do next can make a big difference. I'm Andrea Pollack, parenting educator, coach, and parent of a 27-year-old autistic young man. Autistic burnout is what happens when an autistic person's nervous system has been under sustained pressure for too long without adequate recovery. It's not a mood, it's not a phase, it's not a behavioral choice. It's a state of genuine neurological depletion, and it has real observable consequences. In full burnout, those consequences can be significant. Loss of skills the person once had, inability to manage daily tasks, extreme fatigue that doesn't improve with rest, major executive function collapse, meaning your child can't plan, initiate, sequence, or follow through with things, increased shutdowns and meltdowns, and sometimes a near complete withdrawal from functioning. When parents see full burnout, they usually know something is seriously wrong, even if they don't know the name for it. The child is clearly not okay. But there's a stage before full burnout that's harder to read, and that's the stage I really want to focus on today. It's the stage where what we do next, as I mentioned, can make a big difference. I want to name that stage because it shows up all the time, even though most people don't realize what they're looking at. I think of this as the holding it together stage. That's when a child is still meeting most responsibilities on the outside, but their internal capacity is collapsing. They're still going to school most of the time, still getting dressed most days, still doing some of what's expected, but inside, the nervous system is running on empty. From the outside, this is incredibly easy to misread because the child's still functioning, partially, effortfully, at a significant cost, but it doesn't look like a crisis yet. It looks like a child who's difficult, like a child who's pushing back, who's capable of doing the thing, but choosing not to. And that appearance, still functioning, is exactly what makes this stage so dangerous. Because when a child looks capable but resistant, the natural parental response is to push harder, to hold firmer, to not let them get away with refusing. And that instinct applied to the child in the holding it together stage is like adding pressure on a pressure valve that's already ready to burst. The harder we drive, the more likely it is that we contribute to that full collapse. To help us understand this, we really need to think about what autistic children are carrying that most people significantly underestimate. Every sensory environment, every transition, every unexpected change, every implicit expectation requires extra processing. Imagine sitting in a classroom where the lights feel too bright, the noise never fully fades into the background, constantly trying to figure out what people mean, not just what they say. And you're expected to do that for 6 hours and still learn. And many autistic children are very skilled at hiding this. They've learned early and well how to hold it together in structured settings and push through it in public. What parents often see at home then is the release of everything the child's been suppressing all day. And it looks like a child who's choosing to behave differently at home than they do elsewhere. It's not a choice. It's the cost. The cost of holding it together all day, of finally showing up where it's safe to fall apart. The holding it together stage is what happens when that cost compounds over time and the nervous system stops being able to recover between rounds. The child who is managing barely, effortfully, starts to be unable to manage the things that they were managing before. And because the decline is gradual, because they were functioning yesterday, the loss of function today reads as refusal rather than as depletion. These are the moments that tend to get interpreted as behavior problems, but they're often just early signs of burnout. So what does this look like and how do we learn to interpret it? When your child resists something familiar, something that they've done 100 times, the instinct is to read it as a choice. But resistance that is broad, that doesn't follow a clear pattern of what they want to avoid, is worth reading differently. Defiance tends to be selective and strategic. Burnout tends to be broad. When refusal is showing up across the board, that's a signal worth pausing on. When sensory tolerance drops, when things that didn't used to bother them suddenly do, when they're reacting to sounds, textures, or touch in ways that seem out of proportion, that's the nervous system communicating that its resources are depleted. The window of tolerance shrinks when capacity shrinks. When they're recovering more slowly from hard moments, when a difficult morning used to be done by noon and now it colors the whole day, that's the nervous system losing its ability to bounce back. When our children become more rigid, more insistent on sameness, more distressed by the unexpected, that's another sign of a nervous system reaching for control because everything feels like too much. And when they seem flat, withdrawn, less interested in the things they usually love, that's the nervous system conserving every available resource just to get through the day. Each of these, read through a behavioral lens, looks like a problem to correct. But read through a capacity lens, each one is information. Your child is telling you something. The question is what framework you're using to listen. There's another layer to this that changes the picture for a lot of families. Some children have been carrying this load for years without anyone realizing it. I see this a lot in children who are either diagnosed later or are still undiagnosed, but in the process of parents looking into what's going on. They often spend a long time trying to meet expectations that didn't match how their nervous system works. They weren't given accommodations. They weren't given language for what they were feeling and experiencing. They were just expected to keep up. And many of them did. They learned how to hold it together. They pushed through. They got through each day. But that effort doesn't disappear. It accumulates. So when burnout shows up, it's often not about what happened this week. It's the result of a system that's been running on deficit for a long time. When you see it that way, refusal starts to look different. And the distinction between can't and won't becomes much clearer and much more important. Because a child who can't is not making a choice. And responding to something they can't do right now as something that they should be able to do right now and just won't, doesn't just fail to help them, it adds to the load. This is where I want to give you something practical because burnout is not inevitable. There are real things you can do to reduce the accumulation of cost before it reaches a tipping point. The first is shifting how you read refusals in the moment. Before moving to a consequence or a push, ask yourself, is this a won't or a can't? Is my child choosing not to do this or have they hit a wall? For example, if your child is refusing to start homework, instead of going straight to, you need to do this, you might shift to, is this feeling like too much to start right now? Do you need help with the first step just to get going? You'll not always know for certain, but asking the question changes your response, and a response that assumes capacity when there isn't any will always cost more than it produces. I know it can feel scary to feel like you're giving in to that resistance because we fear that slippery slope. If we just give in once, if we allow the structure that we worked so hard to achieve, if we let it slip, all chaos will break out. I get that, I really do. But if your usual efforts are not getting the results you expect and want, it may be worth trying another approach. The second thing you can do is build genuine acknowledgement of the daily cost. This doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be as simple as naming it. I know today took a lot. I know that school is a lot of work for your brain and your body. I see that. For a child who's been pushing through largely unseen, that kind of acknowledgement is not coddling. It's accurate, and it builds the safety that allows them to tell you when they're struggling before the struggle becomes a crisis. The third is protecting recovery time as a non-negotiable part of the day. Not as a reward for compliance, but as a structural feature of how your family operates. Unstructured, low-demand time when nothing is expected. The nervous system needs time with no output required in order to restore itself, and building that in proactively is far more effective than trying to create it after a collapse has already happened. The fourth is looking honestly at cumulative load. What is your child navigating across an entire day, an entire week? Not just the hard moments you see, but the ongoing effort of being autistic in environments that weren't designed for them. For children able to function in mainstream environments, this is especially true. This audit often reveals that the load is significantly heavier than anyone realized. None of this means lowering your belief in your child's potential. It means understanding what actually creates the conditions for that potential to be expressed. I want to name something directly because I know this is a common concern. When parents push, it's because they see what their child is capable of. They know what their child will need to navigate as they grow up. They're afraid that backing off means giving up on that reducing demands means disabling their child from the growth they know is possible. That fear is legitimate. The instinct behind it is love. Reducing demands in the short term is not giving up on growth, it's creating the conditions that make growth possible. This is not coddling. That's parenting with an accurate understanding of how the nervous system works. If you're recognizing that your child is already in burnout or maybe in the holding it together stage, let's talk about where to start. I want to tread carefully here because you may have heard that when a child is in burnout, you should remove all demands. And I want to talk about that carefully. That guidance often comes from autistic adults whose limits were ignored for years. Many were pushed through distress, treated like their burnout was a behavior problem, and denied the rest and accommodation they actually needed. That harm is real. And the message that burnout requires genuine recovery, real rest, and meaningful reduction in pressure, I absolutely agree with that. What I don't agree with is the black and white absolute nature of it. What I want to offer is a nuance on how recovery is approached. Because recovery is not something that just finishes one day. It's not that a person wakes up and suddenly has their capacity back. Recovery is a process of rebuilding capacity gradually, carefully, and in a way that the nervous system can tolerate. And that applies whether you're talking about a child or a young adult. You don't build capacity by overwhelming the system. You build it by working at the edge of what's currently possible and expanding from there. So yes, reducing demands is usually necessary, but if all demands are removed for an extended period of time without a clear path back, what can happen is not recovery, but a kind of a stall. The goal is not necessarily no demands. The goal is reducing demands and supporting those that remain with support at a level beyond what your child may have needed before. Demands that are honest about where the capacity is right now and small enough that the child or young adult or person can meet them without being pushed deeper into burnout. All of this rests on a necessary and fundamental mindset shift. When a child is shutting down, we're not looking at a discipline problem. We're looking at a nervous system that has hit its limit. And the response that helps is not pressure, it's support. Recovery from burnout can be really slow, slower than parents want. And here's something important to know. When you reduce demands and create recovery space, things often look worse before they look better. A child who's been white-knuckling it through may have more visible meltdowns for a period because the suppression is releasing. That's not regression. That's the nervous system finally feeling safe enough to let go. Stay the course. What you're building toward is a child whose baseline is stable enough that they have something left to grow with. A child who isn't spending everything they have just to survive the day. A child who can learn, connect, and stretch because their nervous system has the capacity to do that. If this is landing for you, if you're recognizing your child in what I've described here, this is exactly the kind of work we do inside the Confident Parenting Program. Not just understanding what's happening, but building the specific skills to respond to it. How to read what your child's nervous system is telling you. How to reduce the load without abandoning your belief in what your child is capable of. How to calibrate demands in a way that builds capacity rather than depletes it. And how to create conditions where growth becomes possible. If you've been trying to solve this as a behavior problem and it hasn't been adding up, this is where we go deeper. I'll put a link in the description box so you can learn more about the program. I'd love to talk with you. And I hope this video was helpful. If you could give it a like, subscribe, and keep showing up here. That's what we're here for. I'll see you in the next one.